right, Kellan, the time has finally come. We're here.
It's hard to believe,
Didn't think it was ever going to happen.
but here we are.
Building Up Resilience is the name of the podcast. We are Kellan and Kory. We're hosts of a different podcast called Breaking Down Collapse, which just ended here a few weeks ago. And if you don't know us and you haven't kind of seen any of our work, I think that's a great place to start to get to know what we're about. But we've been talking about doing this podcast for a long time, and I think we're super excited to dive in.
Yeah, and it's a little bit new for us because we've only done audio in the past, and now we're trying this whole video format.
It's going to be super awkward for sure.
Yeah, so just embrace the awkwardness. But we're excited about the topic.
Yeah.
Building up resilience.
Super excited. So let's talk about the title first. It's a play on words, just like our first podcast was. Breaking Down Collapse was both what collapse is, and we were also breaking down the concepts of collapse. This podcast is Building Up Resilience, which we're going to be working on building up the ideas of resilience, and resilience is, in part, building up.
Yeah, so that previous podcast that you keep mentioning, for those that haven't heard that, the whole idea around breaking down collapse is breaking down the concept of collapse, but it's also that collapse is society kind of breaking down, dissecting all of those systemic issues and all these other problems that we're being plagued by. And so I think it pairs really well that now that we spent, 2.5 years doing that. And I think we've really covered that well, that there are plenty of problems. We're likely to see things continue to get worse. And so it only makes sense now, like, what do we do about it? And that's where having preparedness, resilience comes into play.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were left at the end of that podcast going, okay, like, we get it. We're in for a lot of trouble, right? Society is, there's so many issues. But yeah, what's next? Do I just despair? Do I take action? What is this? So yeah, the idea of this podcast then is to talk about the concept of resilience.
Yeah, and we use the word resilience, and I know that's used in different ways, in different formats, but we're kind of talking about the topic of preparedness, but we feel like preparedness, like being a prepper, that kind of has a certain connotation, and usually it's very niche. Resilience seems a little more all-encompassing, right? And it's making sure that it's not just having all the gear and having like a physical preparedness, but also building a community, right? And being able to be emotionally, mentally resilient, having all the different aspects of resilience so that we can handle the challenges that are coming.
Yeah, I think it might be a good time to maybe bring up sort of the differences that a listener would find in our podcast than in a lot of like prepping podcasts that are out there, or even other podcasts that focus solely on community or solely on the idea of resilience. We're trying to blend all these ideas together, right? And I think people will find that it's quite different from most of the podcasts that they've listened to. So one example is that I feel like a lot of podcasts are really unstructured. Like, you might be interested in the idea of prepping. So you go and find a prepping podcast, and maybe the first like 2 or 3 episodes are pretty well structured. You kind of get an idea of what it's about. But then all of a sudden you are learning about like 101 ways to use a trash bag, right? Or like 17 things to do with human urine, like just really weird, like niche ideas. And it's not that learning those skills or having that knowledge is a bad thing, but it's like, that's not what the essence of resilience is about. You talked about a few things, it's so much more than that. I kind of think about it, and we're going to talk more about this metaphor, this analogy later on, but it's like building a house, right? And in order to build a house, like, you have to have a foundation, footings, you have to have load-bearing walls, the structure itself, a roof, right? The facade, the bricks and things that you're going to put up, that happens at the end. But it feels like a lot of these podcasts, or a lot of people, when they're learning about resilience or about preparation, they're trying to just like slap a bunch of bricks together, right? Learning random facts, random skills, and they just start stacking them up and hoping that it makes a house that's sturdy. But that's never the case. You have to build a framework first, and then around that framework, you can start to build these ideas.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what we're going for. And I think in addition to that, it's a place to start. Like, it's kind of preparation and resilience for regular people that aren't just obsessed with it and in the whole world of preparedness. Like for me, I recognize that there's a lot of issues and a lot of challenges that are coming our way, a lot of things that I want to be prepared for. But when I try to go look at what's out there, there's so many books and resources. But I have a hard time knowing even where to start. And so it's like, if you're in that situation and you want to know where to start, we've created this framework that we can step anybody through. And it's also something that can be tailored to your situation. So a lot of the stuff that I've looked at when it comes to preparedness, I'm like, I can't apply that because I have young kids. Like, it's just not practical. And somebody else might see it and they might say, well, I can't do that. Like, I can't dig a well because I live like right in downtown London. Or, whatever it is, instead of it being so hyper-focused on you having to be in a certain situation or a certain demographic, this is a framework that can be more broadly applied. And as you get deeper into it, you can find the specifics that are tailored to your own situation.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the first big difference is that we're building the framework, right? We're going to take that framework, we're going to pick it apart throughout the first several episodes, make sure that we've got that solid, and then we can start to, like you're saying, pick those pieces. We can start to get more detailed, and some episodes are going to be more relevant to someone who has a lot of spare time, but not a lot of money, right? And other episodes might be more relevant to somebody who's got cash to burn, but they work 3 jobs to get that cash, and so they don't have a lot of time and kids and where you live, and so many different people are in so many different situations that we're trying to make it so that everyone can apply it based around that framework.
Yeah, and it's when you talk about the different situations that people are in, some of that is all of the different risks that you face, like where you live, your age, like your income level, like all these different things. You're going to have different risks than somebody else in a different situation. Also, your resources, like you talked about, how much time do you have? How much money do you have? What skill sets do you have? That's going to look very different from another person. So being able to mix and match like a tailored approach, I think is just so valuable. And I think there are lots of great podcasts on preparedness and books, and like we're not trying to knock on any of that.
We'll be using them, right, as sources of knowledge for this podcast. It's just maybe not the best way to learn, especially for somebody who's kind of starting down that path.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about, we've put a lot of time and effort into this framework. I think it's going to hopefully help a lot of people. But it's also going to help us, like you and me, because I know each of us is kind of on our own path of preparedness. And I know I've got a long ways to go. Like, I don't think of myself as a preparedness or resilience expert, but I'm excited that as we're learning things, we're going to be sharing them here. So anybody who's tuning in gets to kind of join us along the way during that journey.
Yeah, I think that's another big difference between some of the other podcasts that are out there where your host is like, I've been doing back wilderness survival for 25 years, and they're teaching you from that perspective, right? We're teaching from the perspective of like, we're learning with you. We're learning this all together. We're going to experiment from all sorts of different philosophies. We're going to be looking into different ideas, different skill sets that are out there and trying to apply them more broadly instead of coming at it from saying, we're the expert in this one area and this is the way to do it. Which for some people that might be a turnoff, right? Maybe you want to go hear from the 25-year expert and you don't want to be learning as we learn. Totally fine. It's understandable. Those podcasts are out there. But I think where we're just a little more casual, right? We're just a couple of guys living normal lives. We both have jobs. It puts us more in the same situation as the people who are likely listening to this, who are also living normal lives and don't want to be told by someone who's living a very extreme scenario how they should also live an extreme scenario.
For sure. And as we're talking about just all these things that are kind of differentiators for us, what makes our content different from what might be found out there? We'll get into some of the principles that we really adhere to, but one of those is that, like, being prepared isn't an individual thing. There are aspects of it that certainly are, but we're not advocating for, like, you just get a bunker and a bunch of guns and a bunch of gear, and
we're advocating to not do that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's important. You want to try to build community around you, whatever your situation is. That might extend out to just certain family members. You might have friends, you've got neighbors. The more resilient you can make, like, your network, the more resilient you are going to be personally, and it's going to help all those other people. Like, resilience is a group effort. And so you'll hear us talk about that aspect of community more than where you might hear it in other places.
Oh, absolutely. I think community is going to be sort of the core of what this podcast revolves around. It will be coming back to it constantly, right? Like you said, there are aspects of preparation and things that one does by themselves, right? You have to learn certain skills and you start with that inner circle and work your way out. But you can't do it without other people. And I wouldn't want to, So I think that's a great call out.
And by the way, on that, when we say community, there's the other extreme where it's like you have to go create an actual, like, little off-grid community.
Right.
And that's great if you've got the time and resources to do that. But if you are just kind of living a normal life and that situation doesn't align for you, that doesn't mean you can't find ways to have a resilient network around you.
Yeah, I've heard podcasts that go to the one extreme, which is like isolationism, learn how to go live by yourself in the forest for the rest of your life, right? And then there are other extremes where they're just very specific on, like, the only way to do this is to build a commune and you have to all live with like 30 people, and while that is one philosophy, and we will probably talk about that, right? We will introduce that as an option and pick out the good and the bad from that, and maybe find ways to incorporate the good into normal life. We're also not going to that extreme. So yeah, we're going to try and stay out of the extremes. And along with that, I think a great thing to talk about is that you won't hear a lot of politics and extreme politics here. Kellan and I are not very political people. I think we have our own political thoughts and leanings, of course. But for me personally, I still don't know exactly where I stand politically. If you gave me a spectrum, I don't know if I could plot myself on it perfectly, because I'm still exploring that. But at the same time, I'm not exploring it too seriously, because in the end, I don't think it really matters. I think politics is messed up, right? I think that when it comes to community, it's going to be more important to find ways to get past the differences that you have with others politically, because I think we're going to have to learn to work together despite political differences. So I'm more interested in trying to get past the politics than to accentuate them. Now, of course, like, because we avoid extremes, I also abhor political extremes, right? So that might come off as political for me to say, like, I don't like fascists, right? Or authoritarianism or whatever that is. It'll come up now and then in the podcast, but so many prepping podcasts are very political in nature, and I think that turns a lot of people off. We're trying to be inclusive to everyone.
Yeah, and if you go listen to Breaking Down Collapse, we talk about issues with the system itself, right? The political system, there are things about it that are leading us toward a destructive path. And that comes from both sides of the political aisle. The financial system, there's all sorts of issues there that make us fragile. There's things with climate change, and there's issues with the way we run our capitalist society, and issues with supply chains. And what we've got 130 episodes there. Yeah. So all of that comes into play. All of that is context for why we want so badly to become more resilient. But again, like you said, we're not trying to take a certain stance on that. And with anything that we talk about here, we're not trying to be prescriptive, right? We're trying to guide and provide a framework, help all of us become more resilient without saying like it has to be done this way or it has to be done that way.
And the truth is, nobody really knows how it has to be done because nobody knows what the future is going to be like, right? We're going to, in a couple of episodes, dig deeper into what the future might be like based on our last podcast, right? But it is so open to interpretation. We know things are going to get hard. How hard and in what way and how fast, nobody knows. And so there really is no way to say, like, when it comes to resilience, this is the way you have to do it. If you want to survive, you will do this. Nobody can make that guarantee. And I think that's a great sort of segue into talking for a minute about caveats on the podcast and just making it clear that, like, we are not making any promises for, again, what the future will be like, or that you will survive it, or that your family will get through unscathed. We would be lying if we tried to make that type of promise, right? We're going to present ideas. We're going to present a wide range of ideas. We're going to try and get into the research and study and all of that for what these different ideas, the pros and the cons of them. But in the end, each person has to make the choice for themselves, what is best for them and what they're going to do to try and achieve their goals, which again will all be part of that framework. But we don't want anyone to come at us and be like your way's never going to work and your idea of the future is stupid and all that. Like, there's just no way to know. We're presenting the best that we feel based on the research that we've done.
For sure. Well, what's funny is if you ever read any sort of like a business book or a self-help book or whatever, it feels like they spend 60% of their time just trying to build their own credibility. Like saying, this is why you should listen to us. This is why you should listen to me as the author. This is why this model works. And so far, we're doing a lot of the opposite, where we're saying, like, we're not experts in preparedness and resilience. And like, we're not making any promises. We're not making any guarantees that this is going to be the perfect way to go. We're also not saying this is the very best thing. Like, we've got there's so much other content out there that's great. So far we're kind of underselling a lot. But I think it's important because we're making the expectations clear. While at the same time, I think we're going to add a lot of value. I'm really excited for what this podcast is going to do for us as we work our way through it, what it's going to do for anybody who's listening. I think the framework, I'm just so excited about how adaptable it is and how it can be tailored to every situation and how somebody can go from not being prepared or resilient at all to hopefully by the end having all that peace of mind that whatever comes their way, they're going to be able to handle. So with all of that, we've chosen the theme, or if you look at the podcast cover art, this idea of a phoenix. And maybe you can talk us through why we chose that, Kory.
Yeah, so it's kind of a fun, easy visualization for sort of what the podcast is about, right? This whole legend or idea of a phoenix, this mythical creature, that the whole idea of it is rejuvenation, right? Is coming up from the ashes, starting over, becoming stronger each time. Resilience itself is the ability to adapt to hard things, right? When you get knocked down, you get back up and you get back up stronger. And a big part of that is this idea that we will get burned, right? But the phoenix also burns itself in order to start over. So it's this idea of like being willing to sacrifice, being willing to look inwardly, make changes in your own life, to put in the time and the effort, to learn, to grow, to change, to go outside your comfort zone. But that in the end, you will become stronger than you are now, more prepared.
Yeah, and it makes me think of, like, we love that phoenix analogy both on an individual level and collectively. Because, like, breaking down collapse is all about how our global society is heading toward collapse. We know we're going to kind of crash and burn, and we hope to see in that process, like, those who are willing kind of rise from the ashes, right? And come forward more, stronger and more resilient. But there's going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of suffering that's taking place, and being prepared for that, making the sacrifices individually that we need to now, will allow us as individuals or within our own little networks to also take on that phoenix imagery, right? And come forward stronger, ready to handle whatever comes our way.
So I think it might be good to go quickly through just an idea of what the podcast, how it's going to lay out a little bit. Obviously, this episode, the pilot, is where people are coming to say, is this something that I'm interested in? Is this going to fit me well? But I also think it's important to kind of give a bit of a structure so that you know if there's certain benchmarks you want to hit as you listen to the podcast. So, for example, next week, we're going to talk about basically why all this is necessary, why this is important. If you haven't listened to our Breaking Down Collapse podcast, we recommend it. Obviously, if not, episode 2 should be a good breakdown as best as we can of 130 episodes into one episode, right? The next episode after that, the third one, is where we're going to talk about the principles, really the core principles around where we're going to build our foundation, right? Every action that we take in resilience and becoming resilient will be based around one of those principles, right? And then after that, we'll dive into the framework. So one episode will go over the whole thing, and then episode by episode, we'll dive deeper into it. So that will be through the first 11 episodes. If you wanted to listen and say, okay, at what point can I feel like I've got a gist of what's going on here and I should keep listening, or this isn't for me, I'm out, I would say listen to those first 11 episodes and then make a decision.
Yeah, and I love that we're doing it that way because, like, when you talk about building a house, you've got to first get it all graded and you've got to put in the foundation, right? And then you can frame, and like you said before, you can't just get out there with bricks and start stacking bricks and expect it to be something that's worthwhile. You can't even get out there and just start framing a house if you haven't put the foundation first. So with that idea, the fact that we are lining out the framework, and then it will get deeper and deeper and deeper on these topics that will be increasingly relevant to whatever your individual situation is.
And there's pretty much unlimited runway, right? We could do 1,000 episodes plus of this podcast because there are so many things to discuss at different levels. And I just think starting with the most important and slowly making our way out to those topics that are less, or I guess I should say more and more specific, is the right structure, the right format to go in. Because again, nothing bothers me more than like turning on a new podcast and immediately just feel like there's no structure and I'm out in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah, and one other thing, if this is the first time you're hearing from us, you can probably tell, like, we try to just move through pretty quick. Like you said, we don't want to just like sit around and shoot the breeze and just like give our thoughts. We want to come into these episodes having researched. This episode, we're just trying to outline it as an introduction. Here's what to expect. But each time having come prepared, having researched the topic, being able to provide it in a really clear outlined way is our style. I think with that, sometimes we'll joke around and you'll probably see more of our personality come out as we go. So anyways, super excited for this. One thing it makes me think of is like rewind a few years and you think of what it was like when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and all the world seemed to like come to a standstill. And there was so much panic, so much misinformation and disinformation and confusion. And I remember going to the grocery store and all the shelves were cleared and people were just like putting salad dressing and whatever they could into their shopping cart in this sense of panic. And I remember even myself feeling that like anxiety, that like my stomach just churning, that panic, thinking, what is going to happen here? And obviously, a lot of really bad things happened with the COVID pandemic, continue to happen, but it could have been a lot worse. And if you go listen to Breaking Down Collapse, I think you'll see that there's lots of evidence that we're going to experience those shocking moments like that more frequently and more severely going forward. And I don't want to be in a situation where I feel that lost, hopeless sense of panic. I think having that peace of mind and that confidence, knowing that whatever comes your way, like you are ready for it, you can adapt to it. That's the kind of resilience that I'm so excited that we're going to be building together.
You know, it was great in breaking down collapse. We got a lot of messages from people saying, understanding this information clearly has helped with my mental health, right? I think when we were starting the podcast, we were a little worried, like, we don't want to be introducing bad news to people. But for the most part, people were just saying, like, we already knew that things were bad, but it was all these vague ideas floating around that we couldn't quite wrap our minds around. Your podcast helped us to be able to formulate that, and it was calming. This podcast, I hope, takes that an extra level, right? Just to be able to say, okay, not only now do we understand what the problem is, but we can clearly create our own path to feel more comfortable in it. Again, we're not guaranteeing any success, right? There's everything we say, there's always going to be a massive asterisk, see footnote that says no guarantee of success here. But being able to, like you're saying, be prepared even for the little things, right? The people who had any preparation in place when COVID hit were feeling much more comfortable than those people who were grabbing ranch dressing off the shelves and panicking over toilet paper and all this stuff, right? And this podcast should, I hope, apply in so many scenarios. Whether we're talking about the collapse of society, or whether we're talking about a job loss, right? Or we're talking about a flat tire on the side of the road. Like, there are so many things and so many ways in which having a resilience mindset will benefit your life. And I think I'm just excited to go down that path and to help others go down that path as well.